I had a splendid voice. In fact, I'd sing in opera if they'd give me my choice. I wrote to Oscar Hammerstein that I would be his star. He said, come down and sing for me, and I'll see how good you are. And I don't suppose I'll do it again for months and months and months. No, I don't suppose I'll do it again for months and months and months. I sang the wise old owl, and he left the room at once. So I don't suppose I'll do it again for months and months and months.
Welcome to episode 10. My guest this week is Mick Rooney. Mick is an investigative journalist from Dublin. He is also the founder of Radio Espial. Mick has had an amazing career over the past 3 decades. Beginning as a court reporter, he has published many books on several topics. He moved into self-publishing and is now the host and founder of Radio Espial, which is a talk radio channel which covers poetry, aviation, true crime and missing persons cases. In this episode we discuss Mick's start as a court reporter. Mick tells us how he moved from the world of self-publishing into the world of YouTube, and the fascination that the public has with the cases of missing people. If you're interested in finding out more, then you can check out the link in the podcast description. If you like what you hear, please hit that like button. And if you know someone who would find the contents of this episode interesting, please send them the link. Ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, I give you Mick Rooney.
So Mick, what's the best way to describe what it is that you're best known for, or what you do?
Well, first of all, Vinny, thanks for having me on the podcast.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah, that's such a wide question. I think people know me for many different things. I won't go into too much detail on everything. Ultimately, where I am now, I'm a journalist. I'm predominantly an investigative journalist. I'm a writer. I've written novels. I write poetry. But primarily now I'm an investigative journalist and broadcaster with Radio Espial.
Okay, so I hear this term a lot, investigative journalist.
Yeah.
Can you tell me what is an investigative journalist?
It's everything that current media isn't now. And that's not to be... What I mean by that is, when I grew up, there would have been as many investigative journalists, core journalists in the true sense of what we think about as a journalist. Now we just have a lot of reporters reporting the news and regurgitating what they're told to say. What I do is I research, I investigate, I explore, and then I show and tell to give the viewer or the listener the best perception and synopsis of whatever it is that I'm investigating. And there isn't enough of that anymore in media. And it doesn't matter what that is. I could be talking about an aviation story. I could be talking about a murder case. I could be talking about something generally within the publishing and writing industry as of now, and many things that I've covered and done. But there just isn't enough of that now. And I think an awful lot of it is down to, I think you probably experienced this yourself. It's down to budgeting in media. Media companies just won't spend the budget on that kind of work. Because when you get a story or run with a story and you investigate it properly and research it properly, it doesn't take a few hours. It doesn't take a few quick Google searches. It can take weeks, months. Sometimes it can take a year or two. The longest case that I've been working on is from 2014, and that was the Malaysia Airlines disappearance of MH370 flight MH370. That's still ongoing. That's still a part of what I do and investigate. So cases that I cover can go on for years and years and years, and I go with them until there's resolution.
So what were the events that led up to you becoming an investigative journalist?
Many years ago, around, I left school in 85. I grew up in a very ordinary household. There was nobody within the immediate family who was involved in media or journalism. The closest to it was on my mum's side. My uncle was a photojournalist, Paddy Whelan from the Irish Times. And I was fascinated with the work that Paddy did because he spent an awful lot of time, of course, back in the 70s, 80s. This would have been Northern Ireland was a constant play in the media. And I was fascinated with the work that he did. Around 14 or 15, I started writing. I knew that was a passion. I've done many things in my life from band management, journalism. I've worked in retail and logistics. Originally, when I left school, I wanted to be a pilot or an engineer. Ultimately, I always knew that my passion was journalism and writing. And I constantly have went through cycles in my life where I've ended up back there in that place again. I was very lucky around, I think, 88 to have a wonderful tutor when I trained in journalism. And that was Eugene Maloney from the Evening Herald. He was with at the time. And sadly, the loss of Eugene, had an impact on me, like many people in the industry. And Eugene was a wonderful tutor, and he was very much of the style, go out, tell the story as accurately as you can, and don't ever become the story itself. Don't cross that line. And I've always tried to live to that and do my best to tell a story as accurately and as objectively, as unbiasedly as possible. And it doesn't matter what it is, whether it's an aviation story, a murder case, or whether I'm talking about the pharmaceutical industry or whatever it is.
So what's the skill set? Like, what do you need to possess to be an investigative journalist? Because it sounds like a very thorough occupation. It requires a lot of patience, I would think.
It requires a degree of human skills that mean you have to, the first thing I would say, you have to deal with, you can't personalize everything. You have to deal with people sometimes that you don't necessarily like. It's a hard-nosed occupation. And then you still meet wonderful people. And I think it's also recognizing where there's a story. There's a story in everybody's life. Some stories are easier to tell and put across for an audience than other stories. But most importantly, it's knowing that's a story. That's a connection people will get, and it's understanding it. And there's an art and a gift in that. And being able to bring the focus of that story to the forefront and people understand, yeah, I get it. And it can be, if you're good at your craft, you can deliver a story that might, if you wrote it down in words, in 2 lines, it might seem the most mundane thing. An elderly shopkeeper who's had a shop for 30 or 40 years in a locale, and damn it, he's getting older and times are tough and he has to close the shop. If you know the right way to go about that, you can make an incredibly engaging story for other people. Whereas on paper, it might go, who's going to be interested in that? That's happening everywhere. So it's finding the personal story within the greater story itself. Not every story has to do with a volcano, a plane crash, a murder, or a typhoon or a hurricane. They can be very small stories, which is why I say to every young reporter who wants to become an outstanding journalist, spend, like I did, a year in the forecourts. Take 1 year out and you will learn every aspect of life, from the people who, were up for drink driving, not paying their television license, to the drug lords, to the people who get involved in scams, fraud, to commercial fraud. You will see every aspect of human life there. And then you start to understand people and why they behave and react in different ways. And then you can tell the story.
How did you end up at the forecourts, Mick?
Eugene gave me his press card one day and he said, go out there for a week and just tell them you're Eugene and just sit there in the gallery. Just show the card, flash the card, and you'll get in. They won't stop you because most of the cases in there, nobody cares about. The gallery's empty, the public gallery's empty. It's only in big cases. And I was lucky enough to be involved in some of the big cases, and I'm not going to go into too much of that. But I did it for a week, and then I came back to him and says, "There's your press card. Do you know what? You were right. That was a brilliant idea. I'm delighted I did that." I says, do you want to do another week? I says, "Yeah, go on, sure." And I did another week, and then I gave him back his press card, and I says, "I'm going to continue doing this." I wasn't working at the time, full-time working. And I said, "I'm going to continue doing this." And he ended up doing it for nearly a year. And I didn't have to have his press card because by that stage, when I walked into the forecourts, the guardie at the doors recognised me anyway from the previous 2 weeks and just said, "Oh, yeah, you again, yeah, go on. And I would just sit there taking copious notes. And I think that's the best thing that any journalist can do for the first year. And then go out into your local community and by all means cover the, tidy towns competitions, the marathon, and do all that and find the local stories. But at some point, you'll find your place and you'll start recognising, now I want to go one step further. Now I want to do something more and more serious and more. And really, that's how I started out.
So can you remember your first investigative journalistic piece?
I think it was to do with two traveller brothers who were charged with stealing, I think, metal from an industrial estate up on the Ballymount Road. And I think that's the first story I covered. I can't remember which was like a provincial, like Dublin South side of one of those papers. I think I covered it for. I think that was the first story. And yet, again, you see, on paper, in words, you might go, "Oh, that sounds a bit boring." That does. But actually, it wasn't. It was the first case where I thought, there's a bit of meat on this now. And I could get into it. I could tell the story of the brothers. I could tell what happened. I could speak about the witnesses at the trial. There again, it's finding the story and doing it the right way and not making something more of something that's small, but realizing there's a bigger world in a small world. Does that make sense?
Yeah, a bigger world in a smaller world. I like that.
Yeah.
So what was the next step for you? You began as an investigative journalist, or you began in the forecourt, should I say, and then you found your way into investigative journalism. And
I went to the UK because I got very little journalism work here. When I finished the course with Eugene, Eugene said to me, "Do you want me to introduce you to," I think it was a guy called Stephen, in the Evening Herald, and see if maybe there's something for you there to do in the Evening Herald. And by that stage, I made up my mind. I says, no. I've enjoyed the time I've done in the courts, and no, I don't want to get into what I already realised then was mainstream journalism. I don't want to go in every morning to sit around a table and be told by an editor, like, you need to go to Tala, or you need to go here, or you need to go there, or can you go across to Galway and they're having a fete, or they're doing this, or there's two fishermen are gone missing in the sea off the Clare Coast. I didn't want to be told what to cover. I wanted to be able to say, that's a story I'm interested in. I want to cover that story, because that's generally not, particularly at the early stage, that's not the way it worked. And I have no regrets about doing that. Ultimately, I moved to the UK. I signed on with a few job agencies there. And I remember telling I think his name was Lee, an Action Staff Bureau. And I remember telling him what I wanted to do because I was getting more confident then. And he said to me, Mick, I don't really have too much for you, but I'll see what I can do. And I was doing everything from loading containers, truck containers, all sorts of stuff. But every so often, every couple of days, he'd come up with a gem of a job. And it was like, Mick, you're going to like this morning. I says, where are you sending me now? And he says, I want you to go to Mayfair. They're shooting an ad for McDonald's. You're just going to be a gopher or just to clear up when they're finished filming. And I'd go in there, and scattered around would be the scripts of the advertisement they were doing. And I'd cover them. I'd take them home, and I'd sit for hours at night, and I'd study the script, how it was written, how it was constructed. And he sent me on quite a number of jobs like that. And I got fascinated for a while with London. Ultimately, I had to move outside London. And just by chance, kind of the music thing came along. I ended up working for Virgin. And I transferred back to Ireland. And for a good 10 or 15 years of my life, I spent it mainly in the retail and logistics management area before I really started to get back to journalism. But even behind all that, I was still writing. I mean, by 22, 23, I'd already written my first novel, Academy. And so I continue to write. I've been very lucky. I started out self-publishing. I've since then had commercial deals. 10, 15 years ago, I was asked to write a book by my UK publisher, generally about the publishing industry, because that was an area that I developed about 2007, 2008. I got an idea. I'll create a journalist blog, because everybody's creating websites now. And I'll just write about my daily life and see does it get any take up. And I'll write about the things that I want to write about. And within a year, that developed into the Independent Publishing Magazine. And we ended up with tens of thousands of subscribers. Ultimately, it got so big. A colleague in the US made me an offer. He says, I'll buy the company off you. I'll buy the Independent Publishing Magazine. You stay on. You continue running it. Ultimately, he got bought out by another company, Salem Communications in the US. They bought it, and they did the same. They asked me to continue on. And it was only actually earlier this year I actually gave up doing that, because Radio Espial has just become far too big a thing now, and I simply told them I can't do both together, and one is becoming far more important to me than the other. And kind of being a publishing consultant, which is what I was doing when I was chief editor of the Independent Publishing Magazine, that's kind of an aspect that I did then that I no longer, my heart just really wasn't in it, and I wanted to get back more to the core journalism that I do now. Did you? I had this thing, Radio Espial, that had been sort of chugging away through the aviation and poetry and prose stuff that I was doing on the channel since 2017, and it just has started to roller coaster in the last 2 or 3 years, particularly since I started to swing back towards the true crime stuff on it.
Did you feel like it had gotten too corporate, suits and boardrooms, like that it sounds like when it started, it was a lovely, organic, creative environment.
Everything, Vinny, that I've ever created, that was my baby, the Independent Publishing Magazine. And I started that from nothing. And, I made a few quid on it. Nothing, not a photo. You wouldn't even buy a car with what I sold it for. But that was my baby. And I think people saw the investment I had in it, which is why they asked me, even when they bought it, said, we really need you to hang around here, though, as the person driving it behind it. Has it become, was it the corporate thing? No, I was lucky to have two people in both those companies who had dual ownership on it eventually, that were good to me and pretty much allowed me to run it the way I wanted to. So it wasn't a case of sitting in a boardroom, in front of suits telling you this is the way you have to do it now, and you have to change this, and we have to aim high. And no, it wasn't like that. I was very lucky to be left to my own devices, which is a rare thing now in this industry.
It seems like the independence has been kind of either stifled or cut off completely from people.
Watered down.
Watered down, yeah, is a better. And that kind of brings you to how I came across your work. Your new project. Would you like to tell us more about what you're doing now with regards Radio Espial, is it?
Radio Espial. Radio. People straight away go, why is it called radio? It's not on the radio. It's on YouTube. I said, look, it's just one of those historic things. I started it originally with the idea, like yourself, as purely a podcast, a sound podcast. And that was all it was going to be. And then I went, you know what? I think I'll get more traction on YouTube if I just move this over from www.radioespial.com. If I actually move it over from just the podcast arenas, if I move it over to YouTube. And then I went, yeah, if I do that, then I've got to have something to go with it. I have to have visuals. And then slowly and surely, as it expanded, I thought, I can't keep going on every week and reading poetry or talking about the publishing industry when I'm not as connected with that industry as much anymore. And I can't keep going on and on and on about the aviation industry and Malaysia flight MH370. And I've interviewed so many people on that case. I've trashed it to death. It's not progressing any further. I can't. What am I going to do? And I thought to myself, I'll go back to what I originally did when I started out. I'll go back to the courtroom. I'll go back to the crime. That's what I always loved doing. And about 3-4 years ago, that's what I started doing. And since then, that's when the channel really started to explode then, and particularly in the last year.
Okay, why do you think it has begun to explode? Because it's picking up viewers and traction. Why do you think that is?
People have always been fascinated, I think, with true crime. That goes right back to your 1980s, 1990s on TV. You go back to when we were, Starsky and Hutch, Kojak, The Professionals on ITV. People have always been fascinated with crime, the good guys, the bad guys. What I do is certainly slightly different. I'm not dealing with gangland criminality. I'm predominantly dealing with the darker side of murder and murders. I looked at this and I thought, is this a good idea to not so much to move into this area, but to expand on this area? And I thought, I don't know, because this is a very crowded space and there's a lot of channels out there. And I looked at them and I thought, I can do better than that, because it's in my bones, it's in my blood. I've done this and I know how to deliver this. And too many other people are doing copy. I didn't want to do what everybody else was doing. And it just, my perception, and I don't want to offend anybody out there who also maybe covers true crime on social media or YouTube or anything. But I just saw, my perception was, this is just copy and paste. People are just reading news articles and regurgitating the news articles to a camera. That's not what I want to do. That's not investigative journalism. Investigative journalism is about telling the story, highlighting things that maybe have been missed, examining a story in its minutiae. I didn't want a coffee morning style crime thing where it almost becomes relaxed entertainment, binge watching. And I didn't want that. I wanted people to be reminded of, this is serious. We're dealing with families here of maybe missing people who have been murdered. Somebody's responsible for that, or somebody hasn't been found. And I wanted to examine that in detail, in all its detail, good and bad, so people understood a case more, better than they probably would if they sat looking at something on primetime TV or primetime radio. And that's the perception I had and the approach I had. And that's why I started to work with constructing some cases on a solid timeline. And if it took me half an hour to go through that timeline, if it took me 2 hours to go through that timeline, that's what I would do. I'm lucky now in that behind the scenes, although people mightn't realize it, I've more people on board. My wife works with me as well on an awful lot of the graphics work and technical work in the background. Kieran McConnell from Ireland's Vanishing Triangle and Ireland Cold Cases, who study criminology and psychology, also works with me on some of the episodes. So there's quite a lot happening there in the background now on each case that we take on.
So that's how I came across your videos. I would have to say I'm a big fan of true crime documentaries. And what I don't know if you remember many years ago, there used to be Real Crime UK. It was a series of documentaries of true crime.
It's still you'll find that on YouTube. It is still there, yeah.
I loved it, absolutely loved it, because it delivered the facts. That's all you got throughout the entire thing, was the facts of the case as they happened. That's what I love about the videos that you do.
Yeah,
it's all facts.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. That's what I don't take on this amount. One of the other things that struck me, I remember, I think one of the very first cases I covered, it must be now 3 years ago, the Gabby Petito case in the US. I know. Where do you guys get the energy to cover this case? There were YouTubers out there, not once a day, 2 and 3 times a day, covering an hour here, an hour there, an hour there. And I'm going, but nothing's happened in the case. And they could tell you everything about what Gabby Petito had for breakfast, what she had for dinner, what she loved, liked, all the holidays she went on. And I went, how is any of this relevant to this actual case? You know, you can't find her. This was before she was found. And I thought, that's not the way I want. That kind of style of wall-to-wall coverage of a case. And it's quite common now on YouTube. And it's not the thing I do. What I do is I bring all the aspects of a case together up to date. Could be a case that happened last year. Could be a case that happened 10 or 20 years ago. I've covered cases back from 1958 in Ireland. That's what I do, and I bring everything together. I don't do this daily routine of appearing, covering, or what I also don't do, and it's a very strict thing as a journalist for me, and I have been asked about the Aisling Murphy case. There are certain cases I do not cover, and I particularly do not cover cases where there is an ongoing trial. That's subdued. I'm a journalist, a professional journalist. That's subdued to say I do not comment on an ongoing trial where someone's liberty, the accused, is up for discussion. I don't get into that area. It's for the jury of his peers or her peers, whoever's on trial, and the families and the counsels involved to deal with that in a case. It's not up to me to get involved myself or start running commentaries on ongoing cases. So I'll only deal with them up to a trial, or I will surmise about them after a trial is complete. So I might go back and do the Aisling Murphy trial, but it will be in reflection. This is what happened. This is how it occurred. This is the investigation. This is how, here were the breaks. This is how it occurred. You know, much as this is how the person was found. This is why this was the motive in that case, you know, that kind of thing. And there are certain cases I won't touch. Go on.
With the wall-to-wall coverage, do you fear for the state of the justice system?
No, I think it's solid enough to stand up to that. I think judges in general, and I'm speaking primarily judges in the UK and Ireland, are fairly strict about what they will allow and what they don't allow. And they already are well versed coming up to a trial and will already start pulling the plug and will say, I'm only allowing a certain amount of journalists in the court, or what can be covered and what can't be covered. And they're a lot more strict about that. Less so, I would say, in the United States and parts of Asia. But definitely they're much more strict. So no, I'm not necessarily worried about that, provided our judges don't have a change of mind. I'm betwixt and between about the idea of TV coverage of a trial, of a live trial. I know we've had it predominantly in the UK in more recent years. The US has been doing it for a number of years. So I'm not necessarily worried. I have a reasonable faith in the judicial system.
Okay. What are the repercussions, though? Like, that's something you said, that this wall-to-wall coverage that goes on. I'm thinking, I'm sure you're aware of it. How does that hamper an investigation, I suppose? What are the repercussions of it? Quite recently, you might remember, probably a year ago, there was a horrible murders of 4 students in Idaho.
Oh, right, yeah. I think I know the case on it, yeah.
Yeah, and up until the suspect was apprehended, there was this wall-to-wall coverage of this, that, and the other. It was quite a barrage. From my knowledge, I'd never quite seen anything quite like it. I was following it up until a point, and then I actually had to shut off, and I said, no, I can't follow it because this is getting too much now. Every second there was an update, but it was an update we'd already been told, but it was just being told.
I told in a different way, 100 times.
Yeah. What is the repercussions of that on an investigation? Or are the repercussions, do you think?
The worst repercussion is the investigators ultimately cannot bring a case against an accused or an arrested person. Worse, it goes to trial, and the trial collapses on a technicality because of prejudicial information in the public sphere. And when you have that, you potentially will never be able to try that person again. And that person may very well be the guilty party, but because they get off on a technicality, not everybody, some people get very frustrated with cases that I cover, and they go, why didn't they arrest that person earlier? How on earth could they have let that go on for so long? And this is the other part of the process that I'm trying to do in the video content that I present. It's that the judicial system and the process of an investigation has to work a certain way. It's not based on hunches, speculation, or opinions. There has to be evidence. I won't go too much into it because it ultimately will be coming up for trial next year. The Tina Satchwell case, why wasn't her husband arrested earlier? They didn't have the evidence to arrest him. Why wasn't his house searched forensically rather than just voluntary searches? They didn't have the evidence. The police can't go waltzing into somebody's house and say, we're searching here whether you like it or not. They have to go to a judge, and they have to actually get a warrant for an involuntary search. And they have to provide that judge with enough evidence why they're bringing about that search. It's easy for us to be critical from the outside of an investigation. I'm the first person to criticise the police and the Gardaí if they get something wrong, or they botch something, or they make a mess of a case, or they compound a case or delay a case. But the last thing they also need is, I saw this in the Nicola Bulley case. The woman who tragically, it's believed she slipped into the water and was washed away. And we had the whole stream of, Fleet Street across the UK, must be the husband, that's a murder, must be the husband. There's no way. And the amount of conspiracies, literally channels created overnight to cover this case. And then the amount of people during the search who turned up at the so-called crime scene, the scene of where she disappeared, invading that area, compromising the scene, annoying people who lived in the area, getting in the way of police, detracting police's time to corral them or move them away where they should have been out searching themselves. So it pulls resources from police when people overstep the mark. It's one thing to sit at home and hold your opinion on a case. That's fine. Everybody's entitled to it. It's another thing to get off your backside, go to an actual crime scene and start literally involving yourself. Oh, well, I'm here to search as well. You had people searching in the woods, completely, not authorized to search there, potentially maybe coming upon something that was important and corrupting that piece of evidence. And when you have that, that's where an investigation is seriously compromised by that kind of attention and that level. And that even goes for people who are the best well-meaning people. When people want to get involved in a search, say somebody goes missing, you go to your local area, wherever it is, wherever that person is missing, you talk to the local Gardaí and the local rescue forces, you work with them, and they will be only happy that you're willing to help them, and they will coordinate it, and they will give you proper instructions as to what to do, what not to do, what to look for, but don't go involving yourself or inserting yourself into a case, particularly physically into a case or a crime scene.
Where does that come from? Again, you've touched on something I kind of picked up. They call them amateur sleuths, I think.
Yeah.
Is this people who watch too much Criminal Minds and CSI and stuff?
I think to some degree, yeah. It's people and often I found it with the Nicola Bully case. There were a couple of people actually not just warranted and warned. There were actually a couple of people prosecuted for putting out misinformation or trespassing other people's property and, affecting a potential crime scene. And unfortunately, some of these people were what I would call obsessives, people with history of mental problems, who were obsessive, who were attention seekers, which is another major problem with a lot of these cases. So you've also and people. There was one guy who had his own channel, who had a series of criminal history, and was covering this case under the pretense he was out to help things and be an amateur sleuth. This guy had a string of offences behind him, from domestic abuse to not paying maintenance, had got into all sorts of banking problems, fraud, and this was the other thing when I looked at how true crime was being done on YouTube. The amount of people that run channels and they're completely anonymous faces, don't know who they are, what their background is, what their expertise are, if any. I've no problem. If you don't have expertise, you're just giving your opinion. That's fine. I respect that. But make that clear and transparent to people. And there are just far too many people that hide behind, much as we have the problem with social media, far too many trolls out there hiding behind social media, their true identity and true agendas and real biases.
What's the feedback been for you since you started up? 3 years ago, you released the first one based on true crime, the one in America. And since then, you've followed it up with a series of cases, some of which I'm very familiar with.
You will be, because predominantly, like I said, I did cover the Gabby Petito case to start out with. I have covered one or two other, shall we say, UK or international cases, but I predominantly come back to my roots, Ireland, and predominantly I cover now Irish cases, and most of my subscriber and follower listings will be Irish people. They know the names, they recognise the cases, and they can identify with them. They can go, oh, Annie McCarrick, I remember that when I was a kid and first I heard about that. You know, that kind of thing hits home to people. Or yeah, God, yeah, was it there, that area? God, I lived there. We used to go to a guest house there in Wicklow as well, and it's, you know, that I think when you get that connection with people, and it's easier for me to cover those cases. I'm based in the Netherlands. So unless I'm jumping on a plane and going to carry out an investigation in an area in Dublin or Galway or whatever it is in Waterford or Wicklow, it's easier to do that in areas where I'm familiar with, because I would have travelled around an awful lot. I've lived in several places in Ireland as well. So it's easier to do that when you're kind of on terra firma in an area that you know, and you know the jurisdiction, you know how the investigations work in that jurisdiction. It's a lot easier than it is, say, to deal with a criminal case, say, in Spain or in the United States or in wherever, Asia. That was harder for me to cover the Malaysia Airlines case because I was dealing with different jurisdictions. Mind you, for the North Korean case, it did help a little bit because it was based in the same area in Malaysia. So I at least had more of an understanding. And not only that, I had contacts in the area, which was important.
So what's the feedback been for you with your channel with regards to these specific?
It's generally very positive. The most common things I get back is, wow, I've watched so many documentaries on whatever it is, X case, and this is the most thorough one I've ever seen. You're presenting details to a depth that I've never come across that's been covered even in the mainstream media on this case that I never knew about. The way you present cases makes sense. It starts to fit together, and you're never afraid to answer hard questions about a case. So generally, it's been very positive. Some people will say, you know, Mick, an hour and a half, 2 hours for a case, you know, that's tough going. Yeah, it is. But my argument will always be, it'll be the case and the content. When you see it, it'll be as long as it takes for me to tell the case accurately. If I can't I approach every case. If I can't add any kind of quality to this case or say something more about it that hasn't been said already before, then I'm not going to do it. Then there's no point, because I'm just regurgitating what's already out there. I want to add something to a case, an aspect or a thoroughness that hasn't been done before, or ask questions that haven't been asked before, or point a light in areas that haven't been pointed in those areas before. So unless I can add quality to a case, I won't do it. And then there are certain cases I'm not going to touch anyway, because I know the kind of online trolling people they will attract. And that's unfortunate. It's not that I can't cover them, I choose not to. And there are certain obvious cases that I'm just not going to touch. And I'll give you one prime example, the Madeleine McCann case. I have no interest in ever touching that case, because you know, and I know exactly the kind of people it attracts.
Yeah.
When I present a case, I am not interested. I'm interested in covering the facts, what happened in the case, and telling it as accurately as possible. I'm not interested in hosting a moral or political debate, you know, about the case itself. That's neither here nor there to me. I remember the words, I think it was a judge called Judge McNamara in that first year in the courts. And he had a couple of counsels, defence counsel and prosecution, and the two barristers were sort of arguing and playing off each other and playing up to the rest of the court, the people in the court. And the Judge McNamara admonished both counsels and said, you know, this is not reality television here. You know, stop playing up, you know, to people. You know, everybody that walks into my court, you park your emotions at the door when you walk in here, because what we're doing is about freedom, it's about liberty, and it's about a fair trial for everybody. It's not about bringing emotions or biases or stuff like that in. And that's all the kind of things that I try to avoid as well in the cases that I cover.
I think what I really like about the videos you've done, for me, for example, to give a case, 28 years ago, on the 9th of November, Jojo Dullard disappeared.
Jojo, yeah.
Yeah. I know, like you said, everyone remembers a certain case, but that for me was the case. I was a teenager at the time, and all of a sudden, this girl was seen, and then bang, she disappeared, never to be seen again. And it's a case that I followed pretty much every update, the whole lot. I followed. I click on the link. I read this, the whole lot.
I get that with the Annie McCarrick case. I also get it with the Deirdre Jacob case. I had that from a young teacher in, I think, Arklow, who said, "Oh, you know, I used to live in that area. I now teach in Arklow. I'm a similar age to Deirdre, you know, and because I teach, you know, she was also trained to be a teacher, you know." You know, people, everyone has their particular fix on a case that touches a bone with them. It just touches a nerve with them.
Yeah, I think with your particular videos, for me, what drew me in, and I started with the Jojo Dullard video, and I followed. Then I was, oh right, okay, and what brought me in was, so as you know yourself, and as we all know, all the listeners will know, when there's a development or an update, we hear about it and then we don't hear about it.
And now nothing for a year,
yeah. And then certain things, there's a big deal made about, but then you never hear about them again because they have been appropriately discounted by the Gardaí.
As they call it, eliminate. We've eliminated that line of inquiry, And you never get an explanation. And what I try to do is I try to explain why that line of inquiry was eliminated.
When
I cover cases.
Well, you did that for me now on the Jojo Dullard, because I remember a couple of years ago there was a report. Oh, truck driver driving through Moon saw a naked girl running, screaming.
Why? Yeah, well, why? For God's sake, that would scream. You know, we got Houston. We have a problem here. You know?
And it was all over the paper, and then all of a sudden, bang, nothing about it again. And I'd be honest with you, I'd forgotten about it, and then I watched your video and I went, oh, I remember that. And then you told us why. This had been reported for 11 o'clock.
It was the timing, wasn't it? It was the timeline. Yeah. It was wrong for the timeline. And that's a common thing, yeah.
Yeah. So something as simple as that hooked me into your video and went, oh, that's right. Okay. What else now have I not been told here? You know, you hear these things and then you hear them again. You kind of go, because we often talk about this sort of stuff. We were talking about, particularly poor Jojo Dullard. We often talk about that because around the time she disappeared, we were traveling back. It was after she disappeared. We were traveling back through we were over in the Manchester United game, and the whole family was traveling back on the late ferry, traveling up through the country, and this girl was standing on the side of the road hitching a lift. My parents met us all and piled on top, four kids in the back of the car, piled on top, and we were, 2 o'clock in the morning, and next door we're all sitting there, and this American lady jumps in, and we took her as far as we could. In fact, my father drove her right up to the hostel she was supposed to be staying, and we let her off. And my mother says, well, at least we won't hear about another girl who'd gone missing. Do you know what I mean? So, it really resonates with me, particularly that case and all those facts that were here. I mean, if you read the Deirdre Jacob case and then watch your video, there was a suspect in that. But again, has been eliminated for reasons. And very good reasons.
One of the other things that when you recounted that story of taking that American lady as far as she could go, a lot of those cases, I suppose, what's vaguely now the media created, the Irish vanishing triangle series of cases, apparently 6-8 cases that are broadly fall into that bracket, and I've argued that. A lot of these cases are very different, and it's highly unlikely that there's any one person linked in several of them. I get constant names mentioned, and you don't want to be flippant about it, but anytime you mention these cases, that single, we all know who he is, Mr. Murphy, gets mentioned. And I go, oh, for God's sake, do you seriously not think the Gardaí, he was the first person they thought of, with this case? The other thing I tend to find that can frustrate me a little bit when people look at historic cases is, and you were reminding me there about the American Girl, and somebody said I'd commented on the channel. I get it. I understand. God, that's an awful dangerous thing to be doing for a young woman to be hitchhiking. And I'm going, yeah, it is. It is now, but it wasn't as much thought about that way. And it's what I put across to people, and I often use that phrase when we're going through a timeline, and I'd say to people, right, it's time to jump in your time machine now. We're going back to such and such a year. Put yourself at that time, think about what age you were at that time, and put yourself back then. Don't apply morals and the way we do things now back then, because if you try and do that, you're not going to get your head figured around this case, because what we did differently then, we can do very differently now. So don't apply your views and morals on a case, or worst of all, God forbid, start judging people, particularly victims, based on that, because you're just victimizing the victim.
Yeah. I remember I remember very clearly back in the 80s and the 90s, if you travelled any weekend, even most weekday nights, there'd always be someone hitching. And there'd be plenty of people hitching, it's not...
Go to any... And even now, even today, you go to any 18, 19, 20-year-olds, any music festival, Stradbally, anywhere, and you will see still teenagers on country roads hitchhiking, just the same way. How much everybody knows it's a music festival on. Nobody's out to hurt us, we'll be fine, Sure, we're all going to the same place, and, well, okay, but that's a risk you take.
Yeah. So what's next for you, Mick? Yeah, what's in the plans? What's in the pipeline for you?
To be honest, just to continue the growth of the channel. The more it grows, the more incentive is for me to continue. I was saying to you off air this weekend, I'm looking at the Orion White case. That could take me a few days to pull more of the threads of it together. But it's just to cover more cases. I don't have any huge aspirations. Do I want to be doing this full time? I'll do it as long as people want to see the content and think there's value in it. I like what you do here and I respect what you're doing here. I see it very much as an archive of material that people mightn't necessarily today, this week, look at a case and go, I'm interested in that case. But guess what? In 6 months' time, that might be all you're hearing in the news, and you might suddenly pop back to the channel and go, well, yeah, I need to watch this. I didn't watch it 6 months. Now I really want to watch this because it'll give me a better insight into what's going on. And I see the channel very much in that respect. A case that I'm covering now might be well known to people. And I do try my best to cover cases that maybe not, we've all heard of the Annie McCarrick cases, the Deirdre Jacob cases, but, Eileen O'Shaughnessy, Jean Ty, who went missing in Portugal. There are other cases there that people will be less familiar with, and there's still families out there who are desperate to get the case of their daughter, their son, their father, their mother, whoever it is that's missing, out there, particularly if they're missing. Because when somebody's missing, there is always still that hope. Something positive will come of it.
We live now in a time, a media era, and we have done pretty much for the last, say, 20, 30 years, where now when someone goes missing, it's recorded, and there'll be some form of documentation of it somewhere online. Does it ever frighten you to think about the times before we had all of this, when we don't know how many people did go missing?
doesn't frighten me because I'm aware that that is what happened. People just went missing, and that was it. It was never recorded. It's just that was it. People went, and they weren't even considered missing. They just went off somewhere. They must have just went off somewhere else, or they must have emigrated, or they must have went to the UK or whatever. So I think back then, historically, there wasn't such a negative association. This day and age, particularly with technology that we all carry in our pockets now, you go out to the supermarket, and you're not back 3 or 4 hours later. You know your family, your loved ones around you are going to start going, just, where's Vinny? Is Vinny all right? I haven't seen him at all. I haven't seen him since yesterday evening. Or, we're now in an age where we're much more alert to when people go missing. Whereas in sort of the reflected era that you're sort of reflecting back on, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago, if somebody went missing, it's like 6 months later, somebody go, geez, we checked the house there and it's been abandoned for the last 6 months, and actually must have went to a Medica, must have went to the UK. Yeah. And that was it. Man could be strangled, thrown in a river, and nobody knew it and nobody followed it up unless somebody found the body. They didn't know about it. Now you go missing, and we saw you. I always know when I deal with the Garda press office, you always know the cases where there's what they would consider a personal concern of that person, and we know the cues, what they mean. If you hear about a missing person and they're literally talking about that person went missing yesterday, there's a concern, about a serious concern by the family of that person's welfare. Because generally it's often 2 or 3 days before we might hear about a missing person case. So things have changed, but certainly, and I'm still amazed by the amount of people who go missing in the technology times we live in now. But on a positive note, I promise you, the vast majority of people who go missing are found, and thankfully they're found safe and well. The vast majority, despite what we might think or hear, the vast 95% of people who go missing are found within hours, or certainly within a day or two, and they're safe and sound. And that's it. Then you'll never hear any more about it. It'll just be the Gardaí saying, thank you for your assistance. We have now located such and such. Thank you very much. And that's it.
So that's a wrap for this episode. Big thank you to Mick for taking time out of his busy schedule to talk to me. If you've enjoyed the episode, please like it and share it with anyone who you think might be interested in its contents. We're back next Friday with a brand new episode. Until then, you've been listening to the Recluse's Cookbook. I'm your host, Vinny McHale.
My mother always told me that I had a splendid voice. In fact, I'd sing in opera if they'd give me my choice. I wrote to Oscar Hammerstein that I would be his star. He said, come down and sing for me, and I'll see how good you are. And I don't suppose I'll do it again for months and months and months. No, I don't suppose I'll do it again for months and months and months. I sang the wise old owl, and he left the room at once. So I don't suppose I'll do it again for months and months and months.